what you are working on and what you are talking about today, I think, is the most important issue facing the globe in the next 50 years. How do we begin to develop those parts of the world that have currently been left behind by globalization? And I lied, actually. I'm going to say one more thing about trade, because I think trade is critical to this. We are wrestling right now to try to get votes on trade agreements, relatively small trade agreements with the exception of Korea, in Congress. We're having a heck of a time doing it. We saw the collapse of the Doha round, and what you are seeing, as critical as trade is to everything we're talking about, to creating those economic opportunities, trade being much more critical, to my mind, for the developing world than it is for the developed. They're the ones who desperately need the opportunity, and yet there is hostility throughout the world for it. And the reason that there is hostility is because there is the feeling that globalization, as good as it has been in terms of generating economic growth and opportunity, has left a lot of people behind. They don't feel like they are part of it. So when the Doha round collapses and when we have trouble with trade, it's people becoming insular because they fear globalization, and not just irrationally. It is popular in the business community to basically say, gosh, if we could just explain trade to everybody, we'd be fine. We need to educate people. And certainly that is part of it. But while you're educating them, part of what you have to educate them on is you have to show them how this includes them. And if you get 2.7 billion people living on less than $2 a day, I don't blame them for looking up and going, I'm not buying it. I don't see what this is doing for me. So we have to be more broadly inclusive in economic prosperity so that we can move forward with all of the positive aspects of globalization that we know are out there. The growth that can come from it, the number of people who can be lifted out of poverty. You can look at China. I think it's something like 300 million people between China and India have been lifted out of poverty in the last 15 years, and that is almost all attributable to economic growth and trade and globalization. It can work, but we have to make the case and we have to make sure that it is inclusive, that you don't leave as many people behind. So when we're looking at how we reorganize foreign aid, that's a piece of it, but I think the far, far bigger piece is global development, working with the private sector, working with NGOs, working with all these groups out there that are trying to figure out how to reduce global poverty and how to create as much economic opportunity as possible. So I am optimistic that as we go forward into the next administration and the next Congress, this is going to be a central focus of our foreign policy. And I look forward to working with all of you to try to figure out how to do that best, because I do firmly believe that it is the business community that is going to lead us on this. It's the business community that knows best how to create the type of economic opportunity that is what's going to be the key to lifting people out of poverty and creating broad-based global development. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I look forward to working with all of you on these issues. This is something that I am very centrally focused on. I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well, and I'm very focused on global poverty there. So all of my committee efforts really come back around to the idea of global development, and this is a great opportunity for me, and I think we have a lot of good work to do in the years ahead. Thank you for the chance to say a few words this morning. I think I've got a couple minutes, I guess, to take a few questions. Sure.
Morning. Thank you, Congressman. One quick question. I appreciate your comments about the benefits of an MCC model, and I think a lot of us really feel very well about what MCC is doing. Could you comment a little bit about China's approach to development and how the U.S. might look at either competing or responding to that?
Well, I get the biggest thing I feel about China, and one of the other issues when we're looking at global stability and where we're going, there's a huge threat right now from insurgencies being generated from a variety of people in a variety of places. Certainly violent extremism, as preached by Al-Qaeda, is at the center of it. If we're going to deal with that, I think one of the biggest things that we're going to need to do is get the larger countries in the world that have a stake in stability working more closely together. And I think my biggest problem right now is when I look at the major power centers in the world, China, Russia, European Union, us, India, Brazil, we are not really working together as often as we should be, particularly when you look at China and Russia. And I think as we go forward, we need to figure out some way to build greater partnerships with them so that we all have a stake in a more stable world instead of seeing each other as competitors, for global control. We got to shift more towards the cooperative model. As far as China's model on foreign assistance is concerned, it is not in any way decoupled from national interests. Let's just put it that way. And I think that's a little bit problematic in that essentially they're passing out money in exchange for advancing their own business interests. I would like to see that change. I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's necessarily critical for us to force them to change that. I think the way to do it is to work with them to get them to see the wisdom of having a more globally focused approach. But in the meantime, there is a lot of money that China's passing out that is doing good in the developing world. And I guess we'll just have to take the bad with the good for a while, unless someone's got an idea as to how we force them to change that particular pattern.
Just a brief comment on DFID, which, by the way, stands for Department for International Development.
Yes.
One of the...
it's the 4 that always throws me.
Yes,
because in America, 4s, we usually don't include that as an initial, but go ahead.
One of the advantageous things that does happen, I think it's important for this group not to understand, is that although that the decision may not be based on what is primarily of importance for UK trade, there is a strong consultation with business, and I think that's a very important part, because it's not cutting business out. The process can actually continue to involve business, but perhaps with a more long-sighted vision of some of the issues.
That's an excellent point, and I apologize, I did not explain that clearly. As we're talking about development, creating business opportunities, obviously businesses' insights on what is necessary to make a market viable, what they need, is critical. What I was talking about was a specific, we're going to put, a specific U.S. company, like we'll only do business with you if you allow Starbucks to be the only coffee franchise in Nigeria. That's what I was talking about on that. But yes, absolutely, that's an excellent point.